Good morning, Professor Bokpin. Good morning, Dr. Atuahene.
Good morning, Winston, and good morning, my good friend Dr. Atuahene, and good morning,
Good morning, Prof.
Great, and Prof, if you could speak a bit, could speak up a bit for us, so we can hear you clearly. And
Okay.
starting with you, Professor Bokpin. So, in the past week, there's been lots of talk about the Bank of Ghana making losses. Now, the surprise for many is that this is the same bank that in 2021 made a profit of about 1.2 billion. First, help us understand what are the issues.
Okay, thank you very much, Vincent. We are in unusual times, and that is also reflecting on the balance sheet of the central bank. In fact, since 2015, the central bank has been making profits. 2015, they made a profit in excess of 1 billion cedis. 2016, over 700 million. 2017, more than 1 billion. In fact, as you rightly said, 2021, they made a profit of 1.3 billion, approximately 1.3 billion cedis. If you look at the trend, the profitability trend of the central bank, it looks as though they are more profit-oriented compared to even some of the universal banks, right? But we can leave that for another day.
Sure.
So Bank of Ghana can make a loss or can make a profit in its line of operation. That is understood. But what we are seeing in the 2022 is an unusual development in our economy. And that is why it raises concerns, legitimate concerns. And especially when you come to understand the source of that loss, makes it even more concerning. Okay, so where is this loss coming from? It's coming largely from the domestic debt exchange.
Sure.
So what the losses that Bank of Ghana has booked is a reflection of what the economy has been going through the past 1 year. In fact, actually, the signal was clear from the third quarter of 2021. We could go back, Winston. If you listen to the governor of the central bank, the past 2.5 years, you gather from his posture that he has been uncomfortable with the way the fiscal side is being managed, and the transmission of that to how that was impacting monetary policy conduct, you can glean clearly from Bank of Ghana's statements, press, encounter, and the rest of them. Now, the losses there is also a reflection of what the households have gone through, what private sector have gone through. So we found ourselves in an economic situation where the impact spares no one, not even the central bank, the nation's institution, the lender of last resort. How did we get here?
Tell me.
Winston, if you look at when Ghana made application to the IMF on the 1st of July 2022, even before then, we had predicted that given Ghana's debt situation, debt restructuring was unavoidable with a haircut. This was denied. Then we made the application quite late. And we had said that the optimal time for Ghana to have made the application was actually in the third quarter of 2021. That was where we lost market access. And the signal was clear. And it's a bit surprising that the managers of the economy, perhaps we didn't interpret that signal optimally. Okay, so we went to the IMF with debt unsustainability. And that was inconsistent with their lending framework. So they made debt restructuring a prior action. Now, In doing that, a lot of countries, including Zambia, actually decided to exclude their domestic debt.
Okay.
In the case of Ghana, ours was a prior action because if you look at the composition of our debt and then the interest component, the domestic debt was contributing more than 70%. And therefore, if your goal of restructuring your debt and bringing the interest cost down or introducing a new yield curve, a low yield curve, then you could not do that without including the domestic debt. So we did. Now, in the domestic debt restructuring, when government claimed success, that 80% success rate, we knew that wasn't true because out of the eligible bonds of 137 billion that government was hoping to restructure, with exemptions and all of that, they ended up restructuring a universe of eligible bonds of 98 billion cedis, and only 85% approximately tendered at various interest rates, with the average coupon rate coming to about 8.3 or so percent.
Okay.
That meant that government actually didn't get what it wanted from the domestic debt restructuring, at least the first round. With the pushback and all of that, if you use just that relative to the total size of the domestic debt, you could immediately predict that there was no way the country could reach the debt sustainability point set by the IMF, in other words, by 2028. Now, what happened? The IMF, in advising Ghana to restructure its debt, decided that their own debt, because we also owe the IMF.
Exactly.
Their own debt, together with other multilateral institutions like the World Bank, their debts were not up for restructuring. So they excluded their debt from the universe of eligible bonds. In other words, the IMF viewed itself, together with other multilateral institutions like the World Bank, as the lender of last resort. And therefore, the balance sheet of the lender of last resort at the global level should not be impaired. Because if any country runs into trouble, they will fall on the IMF and the World Bank, and therefore their debt and the total multilateral debt as at the end of 2022 was $8.8 billion. So out of the total $30.5 billion external debt, the multilateral component as at the end of 2022 was $8.8 billion. And these $8.8 billion owed to multilateral development institutions were excluded. The reason being they were the lender of last resort, their balance sheet needed to be preserved. However, Winston, in the case of Ghana, our central bank, being also the lender of last resort, that same principle did not apply in the case of our central bank.
Why didn't the same principle apply?
Because to us and our economy, the central bank is not just for policy prescription and implementation, not just for monetary policy, not just regulation. It also embraces a developmental dimension. So you can be policy solvent, but you may be incapacitated in responding to certain critical needs in the economy as a bank of as a lender of last resort. So in the case of Ghana, that wasn't applied. Now, because government did not make significant progress with the debt restructuring, especially the domestic debt, with the pushback and all of that, the balance sheet of the central bank was then used as a balancing item, as we say it in accounting.
And for those who don't understand that, what does it mean?
What it means is that the difference if you look at the journey to debt sustainability and the progress we have made or we could make with the debt restructuring, in other words, the haircut imposed on other creditors, and also we have a fair idea what will happen with external debt, the gap could only be closed, or we could get closer to the end game by loading a substantial portion of the haircut on the central bank's balance sheet. This is what we did. This is my considered view.
So, in effect, you're saying that because we couldn't meet that, we had to give the Bank of Ghana a haircut.
A deeper haircut.
And in this case, the Bank of Ghana admits they took a 50% haircut even on the principal.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
Let me bring in Dr. Atuahene here. I'll go back to Professor Bokpin, but let me bring Dr. Atuahene in here and ask the question: could things have been done differently?
Thank you, Wilson. Winston, thank you very much. And thank you to your cherished listeners. And good morning to my friend, Dr. Professor Bokpin. I think right from the word go, we knew where we were going, but we didn't prevent what has happened today. Because I believe the law was specifics, the Bank of Ghana law and the fiscal responsibility. They were clear that you can't do 5% fiscal, this, you can't do 10%. But if you choose to do over and over above what is expected, then we end up this fiscal dominance with Bank of Ghana that has resulted into a debt restructuring of the central bank. So for me, where I'm sitting, I think we could have prevented it. But we decided that let us carry on as usual. And we've carried on as usual and have ended up in such a mess. So like if you listen to Prof. Bokpin, from 2021, the signals were there. It was there. But instead of we looking at the fiscal side, we decided that we can go to Bank of Ghana, let them refinance some of the issues and go. Forgotten that when individual takes the haircut, as Dr. Professor said, the balancing item is that of the Bank of Ghana and the Cocoa Board bills. Definitely. And they are trying to also to aid the pension to come in. Because we need to get to the debt limits by a certain period. And if you don't get it, it's not going to be easy for you to go to the Euro people to tell you. And don't even forget the IPPIs, the IPPS. They want also to come in because it's also take a chunk of these things. So for me, we knew this was going to happen, but we decided not to prevent it. We didn't take the bull by the horn. Today, we are facing the realities of something we could have prevented.
Now, let's explore the prevention bit. Now, we know that by 2021, by 2021 third quarter, we were shut out of the capital market, the international capital market. So we had to look within. If we had to look within, where were we going to go? Could the Bank of Ghana have refused making these funds available to the government?
Well, it's all about your physical discipline. All these things that we're talking about is about physical discipline. There is a proverb that cut your coat according to your cloth. I don't know whether I'm right.
You're right.
Unfortunately, if you knew this is the revenue you generate, you don't promise heaven and earth everything you want to do within a period of time. And again, the expenditure side, if you look at all that we are saying, all the time is falling on the public. Nobody looks at the other side of it, that we carry such a load. We carrying such a load. When I mean the numbers of ministers and what have you. Professor Bokpin has said it over and over again. But it seems that we want to take the softer spot, get people to suffer, and let us do it this way. But if you don't do that, now Bank of Ghana, the mother of the banks, are being called to do. So for me, there were options. There were completely options.
What were these options?
Since
since 2019. I think we haven't met the fiscal responsibility of 5%. It goes 11.9, 14 point something. All the time we are spending more than we can generate. So for me, Wilson, where I said, I think there is a need for discipline, and we are not disciplined at all. We want somebody to come from somewhere to tell us that this is what we should do. But we can do it ourselves without somebody to come and prescribe something for us, which has ended up destroying the investment of everybody in this country, including the central bank.
Let me bring in, Professor Bokpin. I'll get back to you, Dr. Atuahene. Now, Professor Bokpin, so what were the options available? Could the Bank of Ghana have done anything else apart from what it did?
There were options.
Such as?
And that is why I said that if the managers of the economy had read the right meaning into what happened in the third quarter of 2021, and if we had swallowed our pride and elevated the common good above political interest, pride, we would have averted the situation. For that, nobody can contest that. We made a late call to the IMF. So what prudence will require is that once you were kicked out of the market, and at that time the fiscal vulnerabilities were clear. We had just come out of COVID interspersed with 2020 election. The abuse was clear. The fiscal deficit was higher than anticipated. But then we had suspended the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Even when it was in full operation, we never complied with it. We massaged the numbers largely. Okay? Even right from 2018, you will see that we were reporting deficits on a parallel level, with and without. Deficit without financial sector cleanup, and then the energy sector indebtedness. Once we excluded those ones, we were able to meet the conditionalities of the IMF-supported program that we were under from April 3, 2015 to April 2019. Now, government had a leeway, and the IMF agreed to that because the 2016 IMF-supported program did not comprehensively capture the banking vulnerabilities. And therefore, government took advantage of that to explain that this was needful, and therefore the cost incurred from that level should not be included in the mainline fiscal deficit, which would have meant that we will be above the threshold and probably will not qualify to exit the program successfully or get the next tranche. So we reported the deficit with and without. If you put all of them together inclusively, we were doing deficit in excess of 7% from 2018. So even when the Fiscal Responsibility Act stipulated 5% of GDP, we were doing far more than that. Okay. Then COVID came. And as usual, look, since 1992, Ghana has always been taking advantage of itself in crisis moments to overspend and load our lifestyle and corruption in the interventions we put in place to address those crises. So since, for instance, quite recently, we have moved from one crisis to the other and to the pandemic and then Russia-Ukraine. Between 2012 2015, when the energy sector peaked, in our attempt to resolve those crises, we created a black hole in our public finance space. The result of that is what we are dealing with and will continue to deal with for the next couple of years. We are talking about the take-or-pay purchase agreement that was signed all over the place. And what came after it. So this is Ghana monetizing crisis for perhaps for reasons other than the common interest or the common good.
Prof. Bokpin, the question is this.
Then let me come to here. What we could have done differently. So what you needed to do was to make a call to the fund. You need that external anchor quite quickly. We didn't do that. What we should have done immediately was to look within and cut expenditure. Look, Winston, we have been talking about this thing for a while now. We needed to declare that. We needed to declare war on the economy and aggressively look at what we have to cut. We have to do something that responds to the imperativeness of what was happening. We didn't do that. Then our solution was an e-levy, because we felt that with e-levy, once we're able to inject or mobilize 6.9 or so billion cedis, we could create another special purpose vehicle and load that inflows on the balance sheet of that, and on the strength of that, go to the market and borrow. In other words, we could bypass this challenge. We didn't do that. We didn't do the necessary expenditure cuts. We made a late call to the fund. Before then, the central bank had been exposed to the government.
Exactly. And that exposure is where my question is, Professor Bokpin. So, I mean, when the law was being passed, for instance, when a ceiling was being passed, was being put on how much the Bank of Ghana could give to the government, now,
yes,
it was agreed that government may sometimes have to run to the Bank of Ghana. And so they said not more than 10% of domestic
5%.
Revenue, not more than 5% of the
of previous year's total
of previous year's total
Previously,
revenue.
it was 10%.
Yes.
And then they amended it to 5%.
In 2020, in the heat of COVID-19, the Bank of Ghana gave 10 billion cedis to government. That was more than 5% of the previous years.
Yes.
Now, the Bank of Ghana here indicates that it gave about 64.5 billion to government in non-marketable instruments. My question is, could the Bank of Ghana have acted otherwise when it had become obvious that we were shut out of the capital market and government had to run?
That was a difficult decision the central bank had to take.
Mm-hmm.
There were those who said that they should have stood their ground so that the government would pay the ultimate price. But simply because we have reduced the central bank to a servant, and we have essentially cornered the central bank into a certain box, that makes it look like monetary policy is subordinate to fiscal policy. The politicians have no incentive to do the right thing because they know they can always fail in the central bank. This was what happened.
Okay.
So the central bank, at the end of the day, had to decide to load the government on its balance sheet. Otherwise, the regime could have collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
But that is what happens when a government presides over fiscally irresponsible behavior. The effect is to compromise the operational independence of the central bank and to render it less credible.
Okay.
This is the result.
So let me ask a simple question.
It's a difficult decision.
Okay.
I sympathize with the central bank on one hand, but on the other hand, I felt that the exposure to the government predates 2020.
Okay.
And it's not peculiar to only this government. It's not peculiar to only this governance of the central bank. You also see it, in fact, since we started inflation targeting unofficially March 2002 and officially 2007, across this period, you will see this kind of fiscal dominance of monetary policy. And that is why, Winston, the 16th IMF-supported program, implemented from April 10, 2015 to April 2019, one of the objectives was to eliminate fiscal dominance of monetary policy. And that is how come they signed memorandum of understanding to return to zero financing in defiance of our own law that says they could do 10%. So we respected an MOU over the act. Then when we exited the program, we returned to our point.
Let me bring in, Dr. Atuahene. Dr. Atuahene, Professor Bokpin has made the point. It was a difficult position we found ourselves in. Did the Bank of Ghana have a choice not to make that money available to government?
Well, I think it's neither here nor there. Because if the law is explicit, if the law states you shouldn't do it, and you do it, you fall foul of the law. It's a difficult situation for you. But the question is that's why these two institutions have been separated. We want the physical side to be monitored by the finance department, and we want you to look at the monetary policy and the monetary side of it. But if you allow the physical to override the monetary, that is where we end up. So if you ask me whether you should do, the first question we should, as I told you at the beginning, any time in this country, like Prof have said, we don't even want to stick to what we have. We will promise everything without even looking at where the revenue is going to come to support it. It's just like, let me quote the good book. The good book said in Luke 14:28, whoever wants to build a tower, you need to sit down and plan. Because if you don't plan and you don't complete the project, you'll be a laughing stock. This is exactly what is happening. We will do everything promising heaven and earth without looking at where the taxes will come, the revenue will come. But we always say that, then we fall on the central bank. So for me, my answer is, it's neither here nor there. Let everybody play the rule according to the game. We suspended the Fiscal Responsibility Act and from 5%. What effort have we been making to bring it back? You saw the Bank of Ghana. Now look at, you see, whether we have a choice or not. Now the thing is hitting everybody. So it doesn't matter whether the choice was yours or not. We always, I say to the whole country, we must always plan and follow our plan. When you hear people talking about other central banks being done, I mean, you say it has happened to other. I find it just a flimsy excuse. You can't compare the U.S. the Fed. You can't compare the Bank of England. These are strategic institutions. And when somebody is dead, you see how they recently interrogated the British Parliament, Select Committee interrogated the governor of Central Bank. You'll be very surprised. He was giving a bashing why interest rate is rising and inflation is going down. What we see here, when this debt exchange started, Prof has reminded us earlier, I never heard nobody even looking at the stress testing they have done and the implications on the economy. I mean, in UK, you have to do it and make it to the Finance Treasury Select Committee to tell you that debt exchange will hit here 50 billion, 30 billion, and in the end, that is what it's going to imply on the country. Have you ever heard? And let me ask my doctor, maybe Professor will tell me. I have never heard anybody the cost of this GDP and the implications on the economy. So it's hitting us like a missile. But we should have known it right from November, July, when we started talking about this. Some of us putting figures together, knowing that if we do this, it will happen here, if we do that. But here, nothing has been said. And even when it goes to Parliament, I was expecting them to question the cost, and the implications. And nobody. You see, and because of that, there is a lot of information gap that allows people to go round and round that central bank can finance and cannot finance. Always make sure, always as a human being, you yourself should look at your own revenue side before you spend. Not because you can fall on your ankle or you can fall on somebody. Because the day will come that somebody doesn't exist. In other jurisdictions, that somebody, the central bank, wouldn't have sorted you out. So it means the country will be broke. Because you'll be going consistently to the market to finance your budget. I mean, if you do that, you're not helping yourself. We don't even go to support the productive sector. Today, what is happening to our cocoa sector? What is happening to the minerals? What is happening to even food? Now, if you hear about food, maize, tomatoes, now look at you say onions is going up. Are we not ashamed of ourselves that we import onions from as far as from Nigeria and Niger and tomatoes from Burkina Faso? What sort of country are we? So, Wilson, it's neither here nor there. We need as a country.
When we return, this morning we're joined by Professor Godfred Bokpin, who is a professor of finance, and Dr. Richmond Atuahene, who is a banking consultant. When we return after these messages, we're going to find out the impact of this on, one, the Bank of Ghana, two, on the Ghanaian economy, and by extension, us. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.
On air.
Your morning radio.
All right, now let's get back to it. Now we've I suppose settled the issue of whether or not the Bank of Ghana had any choice in the matter. But here we are. They've posted losses. Dr. Atuahene, I'm wondering, could you help us understand the implications of this on the average Ghanaian, on our economy and on the average Ghanaian? The Bank of Ghana is not supposed to be a profit-making institution strictly. But when they post losses of this magnitude, how does this affect our economy?
Thank you very much. And good morning again to all those who have joined the conversation. For me, the first thing that we should look at, the losses are going to add to the government fiscal pressures, in the sense that if you look at the IMF country report 23168, which was released early this year, they said when the capitalization has been done, when the DDEP has been done with the central bank and there are shortfall, they will go to the government to seek recapitalization. And that is where the fiscal pressure comes in. A government that is not able to handle the fiscal side is now being called upon to inject at least, if by my calculation, is about 1 to 2.5% of the GDP to be able to restore the capital. If the equity deficit is 55 billion, we're talking about, even if it's by 10, we're talking about 5 billion. So that is also going to add, and that is very, very, very important. A country that is under physical pressure, now after the DEP has destroyed Bank of Ghana, the same document is telling us that they should go back to the government to seek recapitalization, as they did with the banking sector. They said, you go to your shareholders and get recapitalization, because the Bank of Ghana is the owner, the government, the whole country is the owner of it. So that is my first implication. It's going to add another fiscal pressure to already existing crisis, and it's a very serious issue. If you look at the way I saw their report, how they're going to bring it back to 2027. I look at it and I say, look, this cannot be. Because in the IMF document, it's clearly stated that after this, you must go and seek government money to strengthen your capital. The second one, which is also very interesting, is that apart from those who are saying it's not serious, there is a prestige and authority implication. The reason why I'm saying this is that Bank of Ghana has a correspondent bank like Fed Bank, that is Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England. What would they see central bank correspondent bank relationship? So if people say it's nothing and it's just like that, we are not talking about an island. The central bank has accounts with so many of these central banks like Fed of US and I know of England, Bank of England. Well, how are they going to say it now? It's a reputational issue. And we shouldn't take it lightly and say that, as people are saying that it's not anything. I've heard people saying that, other countries have done it and so what. And the third one that I want to go into banking is that under the Basel core principle for banking, Bank of Ghana normally issued a risk-rated bond at 0. Now that Bank of Ghana is not existing, the risk cannot be 0. The risk will go between 100 and 150%. Let me explain. Under the core principle, Bank of Ghana bonds, even the ones they've reissued to the banks, the government has reissued to the banks, the one that they have reduced for 2028, it shouldn't carry the same risk rating of 0, because it's coming from a defaulting country and a negative Bank of Ghana equity. And that itself has an implication on the future balance sheet of the banks. So in Latin, we normally say, "Loma dat non cum habet." No one claims what he hasn't got. What it means is that if you wet your salt, you can give a risk rating bond 0. But if you yourself, you are down, it will be very difficult to comply with the Basel principles. On the local side, they are doing, like Prof said, lender of last resort. You see, they support the banks, emergency liquidity, lender of last, open market operations. With these things happening, there is a possibility that it will affect their control, the way they manage or they support the monetary management in this economy. There is the tendency for it, because if you have lost they have lost part of their assets and part of it, it's going to be very difficult to look at the monetary policy management, including the money supply, including the inflation, and a whole lot of things. And even the way they're going to handle these open market operation, lenders of last resort, emergency liquidity report. Because now that the banking sector needs these things that I have mentioned, and it is my prayer and hope that Bank of Ghana will be able to support these institutions in this critical moment so that the banking sector would actually be growing as they expected. For the time being, this is what I can say about the issue, the implications.
Prof, I suspect you'd want to add a few economic implications.
Thank you very much. I think I'm wondering whether there's anything sensible else I can add. I agree totally with Dr. Atuahene in terms of the fiscal process. When they launched the domestic debt exchange, the original memorandum of understanding that contained the terms, our analysis, in fact, including Bryce Simmons from Imani, Dr. Tio Achampong, our conclusion was that this was going to undermine the banking sector overall. And we said it was going to undermine confidence in our financial space, financial sector. Even at the time, I'm giving this background to understand that we worked ourselves into this, including the central bank. At the time when the central bank had risk-weighted the old bonds at 100% and risk-weight the new bonds that were to be issued in exchange for the old bonds at 0%, essentially, that is what we will call regulatory coercion, just to get the bank to sign up. The terms at that time, if the banks had signed onto it, the impairment losses would have been more than 80% on the books of the banks. So I am glad the banks pushed back, which led to 3 different amendments, so that at the end of the day, the losses in present value terms were accommodated below 50%, also giving the discount rate that eventually was agreed. The proposal was between 15.67% to 21%. Even though Bank of Ghana had initially proposed a discount rate of 12%, which was rejected, the ICA Ghana didn't agree to that. So, regulation, in essence, is to generate trust in the system. What this has done, and the signal these losses, and how the balance sheet of the central bank has been impaired, the signal it sends to the market is not to consolidate confidence in the system. Apart from the fact that I'm sure anybody who works at Bank of Ghana, after going through the report, will be demoralized to some extent, because the bank also hopes to return to positive equity by capitalizing profit. That's implication probably for spending. Of course, it will help them to be a bit more efficient. If you look at some of the line items in the budget, in the statement, it appears you need to take another look. Maybe the reason practically everybody wants to go and work at Bank of Ghana. Maybe. Right. So that's for another day. So the signal effect is not good. And this is the bank the lender of last resort. So policy-wise, in terms of the primary objective of the central bank as enshrined in the law, may not be compromised. But we should just bear in mind that Parliament, when they amended the Bank of Ghana Act and accommodated a deficit financing of 5%, already tells you in the mind of the framers of the law how they perceive the central bank beyond just regulation of policy. That the central bank, as the lender of last resort, must be in a position to come to the aid of the government in critical times. Under this circumstance, that is compromised. So the central bank needs a bailout from the government that is already in a bailout arrangement with the IMF and a bailout arrangement with the accreditors, both domestic and external.
How can that be practicalized?
Overall, it exposes the country. That's what it means. It exposes the country. Overall, it undermines confidence in the system and how our external partners, traders, and the rest of them will view us. I don't want to talk about the security implications and all of that, but from an economic point of view, I believe that it doesn't lend to consolidating confidence in the system. If you read the recapitalization plan, the steps that they have outlined, yes, of course, we all appreciate that. But is the government in a position to immediately do the needful? We are not. And also, if you look at the projection, and that is where my concern is elevated. Because we are not doing the net. If you want to restore debt sustainability, we have a triangle approach. It's not only debt restructuring. And unfortunately, the government has decided to major on debt restructuring as the main instrument of restoring debt sustainability. You restore debt sustainability under these circumstances through one, fiscal adjustment. And fiscal adjustment, in our case, cannot be more revenue. We've talked about that earlier. It has to be more expenditure-based. And you link that to reforms, structural reforms. So you will see the way the IMF conceptualized the program. We have fiscal adjustment, then we also have structural adjustment because they know that fiscal adjustment alone is not enough. You have to be able to anchor that within a certain structural reform also. Now, what is in the IMF program is not enough. And therefore, we needed to have engineered governance reforms immediately. Usually, the quantification of the savings from structural reforms, governance reforms, is not immediate. It's seen more in the medium to the long term, but is very, very critical. Then you can also talk about the debt restructuring. But government is not doing much of the governance reform and the savings that should come from there. We are not doing much from the structural reform, let alone to even talk about product market reform or whatever. And therefore, the burden, and because the government is not cutting expenditure, look, we have said this time and again, right from 2021, they should have used the 2022 budget that was presented in November 2021 to announce deep expenditure cuts. That way, even though Bank of Ghana would take a haircut, the magnitude wouldn't have been like what we have here.
Right.
That is the point that we are making, that yes, we all knew, and we had encouraged that a certain level of haircut was unavoidable. But how deep it could be would also depend on how government responds to the dynamics through appropriate. Look, the government has to feel the pain more. But government preserved their comfort and loaded it on. We chose the lazy approach, right? The low-hanging fruit. This is the central bank. And right now, we've messed up the nation's institution. You tell me, which institution do we have left in this country that politics has not destroyed? So I think beyond this, the conversation, we need to have a national conversation about preserving certain national institutions and re-fence them
from political capture. We need to.
So, are we able to trace? I mean, this magnitude of money that government borrowed from the central bank and now cannot pay back immediately. Can we trace what this money was used for? Are we able to see that it was put to proper use, for which reason we can at least console ourselves?
Precisely. I believe that these are the things the national conversation should bring out. You see, the Bank of England booked losses, billions of pounds. But if you look at what they have done with their quantitative easing in supporting the economy through the asset purchase, the losses they are booking now is not raising uncertainty in the market. Because the reversal is now done at a higher rate compared to the rate at which they bought those assets, because rates were low at that time.
That's right.
Okay, but you look, that is why go to Japan. Their debt to GDP ratio is far more than what we have in Ghana here. Other countries, of course, people will say that don't compare ourselves to those ones and the rest of them, even within the continent. But are we able to justify the debts that we have accumulated and how we have used them? Look, Winston, I'll give you an example. You see why African leaders were blaming the global financial system because they have been kicked out, because the rates were high. Before the league shifted to the Eurobond market, we used to do more bilateral from China and the other countries. And we didn't have the liberty to use it, spend it the way we wanted, because there were inbuilt monetary mechanisms. The Chinese $3 billion loan, why didn't we draw down to zero? Because the monetary, because we have to present a project and not the monetary and all of that. It didn't sit well with African governments. So they realized that going to the Eurobond market, you could take $3 billion from the Eurobond market, zero monetary mechanism, because those investors are not interested in how you use them. So when we come, we throw Kenke and Wache party, and then that is it. There's nothing wrong with borrowing. How you use it will result in it becoming a good debt or a bad debt. If we had used those funds in enhancing the cash flow generating capacity of the economy, there wouldn't have been a problem. If the economy grows consistently and inclusively be above 7%, you will see that this debt we are carrying will not be a problem. Will not be a problem. But we are unable to let government explain to us. You see, if you look at the external debt composition, the external bilateral, $5.4 billion. Out of that component, $1.9 billion relates to China, just $1.9 billion. But you can see the underlying projects, assets, underlying that particular facility. Let the government tell us the $14.6 billion Euro bonds we have taken to date, how have we used them? What are the underlying assets? What is the value for money in all of them? Because if you borrow and you use it in the productive sectors of the economy to enhance the cash flow generation capacity of the economy, servicing the debt will not be a problem. We are in this because we have taken so much, but there's less to justify it.
Right.
And that's how the economy cannot sustain it. Let the politicians tell us, across the different political parties, the efficiency, the value for money, and all of that, that underlines this debt buildup. You will see. So that is why they felt so uncomfortable when they lost market access, because you could just go to the Eurobond market. And it was the same posture, Winston, it was the same posture that delayed our going to the IMF, because we felt that going to the IMF, the monetary mechanism and the conditionalities will restrict us. And therefore, let's introduce e-levy so that we create a special purpose vehicle to go and borrow on the back of that. Essentially, e-levy, you check the original document. It was not even GRE that was supposed to collect it. They were going to create a special purpose vehicle, use that to create a balance sheet, go and syndicate a loan. It was that posture that delayed our call to the IMF. And it is that delay that has manifested explicitly in all these losses. This is just what Bank of Ghana has accommodated. This is what households, individuals, banks, private sector have gone through, including pensioners. You know, we need to talk about it objectively so that we can learn useful lessons. We should not get to this point again in our history. You bear this in mind. The recovery is going to be long and it's going to be painful. Some people can turn the corner faster than others. I don't know whose corner has been turned now, but just bear in mind that where we find ourselves and where we hope to get to, there's a price we have to pay.
Dr. Atuahene, I think I'll give the final word to you. We have just about a minute or two to go. Final words here. I mean, let's assume your phone rings tomorrow and it's the Bank of Ghana and they say, Doc, you know, we want you to consult. Tell us, what should our next move be? How do we get out of this 60 billion cedi hole and continue to serve our purpose as a central bank in this economy?
Thank you very much, Wilson. Like Prof has just said, you know, if you borrow and you don't put in productive sector, I mean, like the underlying Chinese road, you can see the flyovers and the roads. But what I want, the 14 billion you're talking, we cannot see it. So even if you point me a consultant, which by the grace of God, I may not even pick it up because my questions and my inquiry into it, they will tell me to go off because I don't deserve to have it. But we have to be very honest with ourselves that if laws, let me repeat what I said, if laws are made, let us observe it. And if it's not observed, people should be sanctioned. People should be sanctioning. You know, it looks like we can pass all the fantastic laws. Enforcement doesn't come in. If Bank of Ghana was to do the 10%, as we have said, and the physical responsibility, 5%, if it has been even observed, we wouldn't go up to this limit that we find ourselves. So my only advice is that Bank of Ghana, IMF is saying zero financing. I hope that is zero financing is translated in the law. The IMF, now we want them to be the police to make sure that if it's not fine, any year report, we should tell them that we are not going to support you. Because it looks like we need somebody from somewhere to come and tell us that we are messing up. And this has gone on over the years. But we have people around who can consult and give you a good advice that, please do this and do that. Don't do this. But if you say it, oh, they say Prof Bokpin, or he is a troublesome person. No. Because we need to bring, it's a country. I have lost investment. I have lost my investment. A pensioner losing money. What is it? What is it? Can I have the same petrol and fuel and those extravagancies around it like other people enjoy? No. After served the country over 30, 40 years, I live in abject poverty because somebody refused to do his job. And somebody is thinking that I can do far more exceedingly above than I can imagine. But you can't. You must look at your resources. Look at your budget. Promise no heaven and earth. Do what you can and leave. That is how countries are developed. It's not just promising everything. So this is what my advice is that let us stick to the laws, apply it, and also get people who will be in the institution, who will be able to say, Jack, no, and even resign. But you see, in this country, we are all political captures. I mean, we are captures. When you get a job, you forgot about the implication of what you have on the large population, the poor people. So my advice to the country is that let us stick to the laws, apply it very well, so that we don't find ourselves in such a situation. Coming out to the Bank of Ghana, then, as I've said, it is having a fiscal pressure on government because they have to be recapitalized. How are we going to get the money? I'll leave that question to the people who created the problems, to let them advise the country how they will do it, because they are in a better position to tell us how they will resolve it. So that is my comment.
I appreciate it. Dr. Richmond Atuahene, banking and finance consultant, we appreciate your time with us very much. Professor Godfred Bokpin, professor of finance at the University of Ghana, thank you so much for spending your morning with us.